Hello and welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Dan Pfeiffer. I'm co-host of Pod Save America and your moderator for today. Something which was probably intuitively obvious. The club would like to thank the Bernard Osher Foundation for supporting this event. Now it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Jen Psaki.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We have known each other for almost 20 years now.
Yes, I know we met at age 5 or something.
That's right.
Something like that.
5 for you, 12 for me.
Right,
whatever. All right, but Jen is an MSNBC host and author of Say More, Lessons from Work, The White House and the World. She served as the White House press secretary under President Joe Biden. Over the course of her career, Jen's worked on 3 presidential campaigns, served as the spokesperson for the State Department under then Secretary of State John Kerry, and was the White House communications director under President Barack Obama. Jen, welcome.
And Dan was my boss at one point. I still think
in name only.
That is not true. That is not true.
Yes, I would consider us always collaborators and colleagues.
I don't know about that.
At some point in this, I will tell the story that you tell in the book of when you told me you were leaving the White House.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
I would say that just reading it in print again made my stomach hurt just like it did in the moment. But either way, Jen, welcome and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
Everyone go buy the book. It's really incredible. It is kind of just like Jen Psaki in a bottle. Smart, funny, relatable in every way. But many people, when they leave the White House, particularly in high-profile positions like the one you had, they write books. And you had, through these 3 presidential campaigns, the State Department, you had a front row seat to history being made, passing the Affordable Care Act, saving the economy under Obama, huge negotiations with Iran and Cuba during the State Department. And then, in one of the most consequential and eventful first couple years of a presidency with President Biden. What most people will do is they would write a book telling that story about what they saw, right? There's not a chance in the world that anyone who's ever met you would think you would write some sort of tell-all book. But you would, a lot of people want to write the book that is their perspective on what they saw. Mm-hmm. You wrote a very different book. Mm-hmm. Even though there are a lot of really great and fascinating stories in there, you wrote a book that is an advice book, right? Mm-hmm. It is and I was struck by that decision when, as someone who has written a book before, I know that the one Wednesday after your book comes out, you go to NewYorkTimes.com after 2 p.m. West Coast time, and you look to see if you made the bestseller list. And obviously there was no question in my mind Jen was going to make the bestseller list. So I went under hardcover nonfiction. I looked, and Jen's name was not on there. And I was like, that seems impossible to me, and someone's definitely getting fired at her publishers. And then I saw that you had your book had been listed as an advice or how-to book. Mm-hmm. So what was the decision to write a book like this basically from the position in which you were leaving?
Sure. Well, first of all, on that note, the publishers will always tell you don't want to be on the how-to advice list because it's a hard list.
Yes.
Atomic Habits has been on the list for 233 weeks.
Yes.
So you don't know what list you're going to be on. When I left the White House, as you know from having left before, I finally had kind of this moment to breathe and think a little bit. And people call you and they say, are you going to write a book? Should you write a book? And, you think about it. And I thought a lot about what kind of a book I wanted to write and what kind of book I wanted my kids to read one day. They're a little bit older than Dan's. They're 8 and 6, and my 8-year-old is very precocious. She's read half the book. She mostly searches for her own name and stories about herself. And then when people come over, she'll flip open a photo that she's in, and she's like, here I am in the book. But I thought about when they were old enough, what book I'd want them to read. And a lot of it was not, I have had a front seat to many moments in history, as you have as well. And there's certainly lots and lots of stories about Barack Obama and Joe Biden and John Kerry, Rahm Emanuel in there, for sure. But I wanted it to say something, to be able to, when people read it, to take away some things I'd learned from mistakes I'd made, from things I wish I would have done differently, from things you learn just from, I don't know why 40 is the magic number, but for me turning 40, I just all of a sudden had all this perspective and I just kind of chilled out a lot about things that stressed me out. So I thought about that, and also a book I wish I would have had when I graduated from college, before I went through trying to climb my way through the political world. So each chapter is kind of organized through a lesson, really stories, but through a lesson, because I hope that it's something that my daughter, when she's older, will actually read the full book, and even my son, too, who's 6.
Did you like writing a book?
Writing a book. Okay, I've had 2 children. It's not an easy process being pregnant and giving birth to children. It might be harder writing a book. I love to write. You love to write. I love to tell stories. When I made the choice to do the book like this, the challenge of it was it's not chronological. It's around lessons, and I had to really, I learned a lot. It's humbling writing a book. I worked with some amazing people to help get me through across the finish line of this book that I'm super grateful to. But yes, it was a journey, and I'm very happy with the final product, but it was a humbling process.
A couple years ago, I did a book event back when I wrote a book in DC, and you did this. The roles are reversed here. You moderated for me.
Yes, and in DC, you walked down the aisle. It's a very funny.
Yes.
You walk down the aisle. It's like you're high-fiving people or something. Yes, true.
It is the merging of literature in a world wrestling event, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
But you told me about I think you had just signed the deal to write this book. You told me about it, and my first thought was. Because I had just been through the process, like, man, that was a mistake. But the way I sort of understood your pitch to me was this was sort of a book for people who do communications.
Yes.
But that's not what it is. It is not for people who are like aspiring Jen Psakis, although if you are an aspiring Jen Psaki and want to be White House press secretary, you would learn a lot from this book. But it's really like a life advice book, almost about how to communicate, not just from the podium in the White House or on TV, but like in your personal relationship. Is that sort of what you intended?
Yes.
Is that what you intended when you started?
No. Well, I didn't know that's what I intended.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to capture, just like everybody in this room and anybody watching and you, we're all multifaceted people and multi-layered. And anybody who knows me, who doesn't actually know me but knows me just from the TV, thinks of me as like this like very serious person who argues with Peter Doocy, right? But I'm more than that, as everyone is, and I wanted to tell stories of difficult internal moments I had in many jobs, also engaging with my kids, which anybody who's a parent here or a grandparent knows that's the most humbling moment of trying to communicate and attempting to communicate of anything. Because I wanted to give license to people reading to understand that we can all be multifaceted, right? That's part of who we are. And communicating is not just about what you say publicly, it's about engagement. And that happens in many facets of everybody's life.
I learned a lot from this book, even though you and I have known each other and worked together for a long time. Like, I did not know the story of your first meeting with Barack Obama.
Oh my. Okay.
So
was
please,
yours better? Was yours less embarrassing?
You tell your story first, and then I will tell you.
It turns out people have embarrassing stories of meeting with Barack Obama. Tommy and I bonded about this. Kelly Clarkson apparently had a very embarrassing engagement with Barack Obama.
I've seen many people over the years
embarrass themselves. It's not him,
Yes.
to be clear.
Yes.
So my first meeting with Barack Obama, I was one of the early, as Dan was, people who worked on the communications team for President Obama. We all joined in February, or you may have been earlier. Were you January?
I was January.
You were January. Okay, well, you beat us by a couple weeks. Whatever, I'm over it.
There's a meeting. The January people are doing a meeting.
The January people have a secret society. Yeah. So anyway, we were in Chicago. We were in this like little office with 4 desks and 3 phones and 7 people. It was but that was the case for months. And I met him, I maybe briefly met him in the office, but at some point, I think it was the fall, in October, I was sent to go staff him, which means go with him to an event. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio. As a side note, it's also the first day I met my future in-laws, so it was a big, intense day. I've been married for 14 years, so it all worked out. My husband was not with me at the time, so I met them by myself, and I met Barack Obama in the same day. But
I think if one of those was going to go poorly, you picked the right one.
Right, exactly. Yes. Anyway, so when you're staffing a president or a prominent person like that who has a motorcade, often they'll put you in the car just to make it easier for them, so he could get off the plane, get right into the car. And so you're sitting in the car thinking, holy cow, I'm about to meet Barack Obama. I'd seen his speech. I wanted to work on his campaign, all of this. So I'm sitting in the car, he gets in the car, and he said, and I had prepared a line that I thought was very cool. I was like, you may be wondering who I am and why I'm in your car, which he probably was. And I was like, that was so good, what I said. Okay, I felt good. Now, I was so nervous in the moment I caught the handle of my purse on part of the car, and I spilled the entire contents of my bag onto his lap. Like pens, tampons, lipstick, everything, okay? And as Dan and I know well, and anyone who's been around him, he's a pretty cerebral guy. I mean, he's so calm, it's almost disarming, because both of us had worked for a lot of other elected officials, i.e. Rahm Emanuel, who are not as calm. And so he kind of picked things up and he was like, okay then, nice to meet you. And I was like, oh my God, he is gonna tell someone, I never wanna see this person again. She's crazy. I, of course, traveled with him then for like the rest of the campaign and then the second campaign too. So it worked out. But yes, that was my first engagement.
Well, if you were going to, there's a moment, he's always very good in those moments.
Yeah.
Because people, particularly back in 2007, 2008, this happened in 2007, people were so starstruck by him
Yes.
that even very famous, powerful people just like fumbled their words in the moment.
Yes.
I mean, my first meeting went fine, but it was a job interview. So then like not long after that, I brought my brother and his fiance to meet President Obama at a rally. And they were like so starstruck and like nervous about it that it made me nervous that I accidentally introduced my now sister-in-law as my girlfriend. which he was very confused by.
Yeah. So that is it. And it's the funny thing is it's not him. He is just like a very kind of seemingly normal.
Like it is normal. Like very
disarmingly normal. And it's more that everyone else, especially in the early days.
The normalcy is
throws
what
you off.
It completely throws you off because you expect him to be, I don't know, like larger than life, particularly back then, right?
Yes.
And then he's not. He just seems like a normal person. And he acts to you like a normal person. Like,
Yes.
Like there are many a politician where if you would dump your purse in their lap, they would never speak to you again.
Correct.
And he would find it pretty funny.
Pretty funny. So I know that Kelly Clarkson had an embarrassing moment because I did her show and she talked about her embarrassing moment. And we were laughing at how like now we're talking about all of these embarrassing moments, which he would never remember.
Well, I don't know.
Reminding, maybe he would.
He did remember me fumbling the introduction to my sister-in-law for like 5 straight years. So.
That's good. That's good.
You write in the book a lot about imposter syndrome, right? And how you felt it and how you dealt with that. Talk a little bit about, like, and as someone who worked very closely with you, you honestly would never have guessed, right? That because you were so self-assured at all times and so calm at all times. Talk a little bit about sort of the advice you give people who deal with that and how you identify it in yourself.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And Dan was my boss at the time where I'm talking about a lot of how I was feeling, which was not projected by Dan or any other bosses who gave me a range of opportunities. It was more my fear of saying something stupid in front of Barack Obama or giving bad advice or not really knowing what to do in the moment and not really being assured of myself. I tell this story in the book about how when I went back to be his the president's traveling press secretary on the second campaign, first of all, Pluff called me, and I was not working in the White House at the time. I'd left. I was a consultant, and he called me, and I saw his phone number on my phone, and I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble.
Did you know it was his cell phone or the White House?
But I was like, but then I'm like, how could I be in trouble? I don't work there anymore.
That's right.
It was just the whole thing, and I don't know why I jumped to that. When I went back to be the traveling press secretary, I realized, Pluff would be traveling, Jay as well, and Jay was going to be, of course, the press secretary, briefing the press and briefing the president, but I needed to kind of step up and be the person he leaned into and saw as somebody who could advise him and give him advice. In that moment, I was like, how am I going to do that? I think he sees me, because I've presented myself this way, as like the person who like works hard and sends notes and writes memos and like, manages the team, right? And Gibbs gave me this advice, Robert Gibbs, gave me this advice, like, just act like you belong there. Because at a certain point, you'll believe it. And you do belong there, right? It's not about really faking it till you make it. Because I was very much qualified to be there and traveling with him and giving him political advice and briefing him for interviews. But it was more that I didn't believe that I was equipped to be there. And so I had to kind of push myself over the ledge of that. But, I think one of the things I talked about in the book that I wish I'd done earlier is part of imposter syndrome, I think, is, and I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but a social scientist, is fearing that people will find you out. right? That you will be exposed as a person who's like not up for the job that they're in. And for me, I mean, I was pretty young. We all were, right? As the deputy communications director, I was very young as the State Department spokesperson. And the fear is paralyzing because you fear, I'm going to say something stupid, you also fear asking for feedback because it's like, if I ask how to do this, they're going to know I don't know how to do this. And that is something that it took me a while to learn that that's absolutely the wrong approach. And once you ask aggressively for feedback, and for me it was actually at the State Department, and people are like, what you said would get us into a war. And you're like, okay. So, or like, you know, don't smile when you're talking about chemical weapons, which sounds obvious, but like, so it takes really leaping into the aggressive seeking of feedback, or this is what I've found, to kind of get over that. And I wish, that is something I wish I had done earlier, but it's all wrapped into this feeling of like, I don't really belong here. Someone's going to figure it out.
I mean, that's one of the things you sort of figure out after working in the White House, because you sort of feel like that is the, at least in the industry that we had picked of politics, that's the pinnacle. That's the best of the best. And it is, but you also realize once you're there that everyone is faking until they make it.
Yes.
Right? They are just, I mean, no one feels, you know, you have to have some sociopathic tendencies to feel like you belong, you inherently belong as the person at this table.
Yes.
Because in a country of 300 million people, that you're the one who should be making decisions. But so I always found that helpful to recognize that everyone feels that way, right?
Yeah.
And it is, but it is like I went through the same thing. You did it all the way to the end, which was I was very young. I was 31 when I went to the White House, and you're sitting around the table and a lot of people much older.
Yeah.
Sometimes people with Nobel Prizes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, you know, it's made me now somebody who's like an aggressive seeker. Like I will, on my show team, I'll say like, I should have asked this question in the interview, or I didn't handle that the right way, or what could I have done better? I mean, which is now it creates a forum, I hope, for them to provide feedback. Sometimes it's like midnight and we've done a special and they're like, please stop asking me these. You're becoming almost annoying.
Yeah.
But it is this recognition that like there is not another room, right? And we are it. And so that in itself forces you, but there's still a lot of things I wish I would have done differently.
How have you had done, by the time you went to MSNBC, you had done a lot of TV, you'd been a contributor on CNN. I would say just, so people know that I knew Jen Psaki was gonna be a television star very early on. Way back early in the Obama White House days, we decided, we were putting all these people on TV, and we sort of had this thought like, are these people helping us or hurting us that we're putting on TV? And so we did a couple of us commissioned a secret project where we took video of various spokespeople and we showed them to focus groups to see like who they found compelling and not compelling, who was trustworthy, not trustworthy. And Jen, you had just been the deputy communications director for a brief period of time and had started doing regional television interviews, like just
and financial TV.
In financial TV. So she had done like a small handful of interviews with like a satellite interview with like a South Carolina TV station, and then some financial stuff because you had had the economic portfolio in the communications department. And so we had all like the press secretary at the time, the senior advisors at the time, the various cabinet members. And we just kind of had this tape of Jen, and we were just like, let's put Jen in the group. And by far, the person who tested the best, hands down. Like the report came back and everyone was like, no one really thought about it because you weren't doing the Sunday shows at the time, you weren't doing the White House briefing. But the report came back overwhelmingly. They kind of didn't really like anyone other than Jen. She was the one person. And so I knew that this is where you were headed. But it is, going from appearing on a panel on CNN or even being a spokesperson for the president or the Secretary of State in your case, both your cases, is different than being an actual television personality with a show. How have you navigated that transition, and how has it felt to you?
Yeah. I mean, and as you know, you have I know you're not on TV, but you have a podcast everybody listens to, including me. And you have a certain responsibility.
Oh, thank you.
You have a certain, I think what I realized early on is you have kind of a certain responsibility to bring something to the show. I mean, our objective every time I host a show is that we want somebody to learn something about an issue or a person. That's kind of a high bar, but you have a responsibility to do it. The transition for me, I mean, there were things about it that were very technical. Like I have no sense of time. We realized early on that like I could just like interview people for like an hour and a half. I can't do this, not for television. And so I get all these time. I get so many extra time cues. And if I fill in for people, I'll say to them, I know Chris Hayes has been doing this for like 100 years, but I need like 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, countdown. Because you can't go over because you got to fit in other guests and blocks on the show. That's a very technical thing. Yeah. Also, learning how to read a teleprompter is a skill set. It's still your words. You write your own words, but reading from it is a skill set. What I also realized is that part of it is how do you transition? I mean, I work at MSNBC. No one's ever asked me to be down the middle and neutral and pretend I have no view on abortion rights or democracy. I have a view. So that's a benefit. I don't even think that even if I wanted to, it would be possible to transition in the way George Stephanopoulos did in this day and age. I don't even know if he would have transitioned in this day and age, given everything happening, because of social media. So that's freeing, because it wasn't like I was trying to neutralize my point of view. But I did have to think a lot about how do I talk about the current White House? I just worked for President Biden, who I like personally a great deal. It doesn't mean I agree with everything they do or how things are handled or decisions that are made or even policies. I have to say that. I have to say that because that's how you gain credibility. So it was really figuring out that. And early on, I think it was hard from no malintent from people who I was working with to shift themselves, who I'd done hundreds of interviews with over time, from being like, well, what is going on with this decision with President Biden's thinking? And I had to be like, I haven't worked there in 6 months. Yeah. I'm not actually in the room. I'm your colleague. I said, not in the
Cross this question off list.
But as much as those have been challenges, what I've realized, and the advice that a number of people have given me that has stuck with me is, that the experience of working obviously for him and knowing how he thinks about things, but also in a White House for President Obama, also in 3 presidential campaigns and the State Department, I can actually explain how things work and when things are wrong in terms of the perception. And that's a value to the viewer. So all these debates, like early on, I was asked this question, do you consider yourself a journalist? It was felt like a very strange, gotcha question. It's like, well, the whole purpose of media is to inform the public, right? So it doesn't, I don't know, you can define yourself however you want. So I think of it that way. But there were some things in the transition that were journeys for me.
Do you ever hear from the White House if you were critical?
No.
Interesting.
Do you?
Sometimes.
It's so interesting because sometimes I expect I will and I don't. But they'll do this. Like you'll say something critical and then they'll be like, I just wanted to make sure you had this.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess in that sense, but no. I mean, you have to be. I tell this story in the book about Robert Gibbs calling me. I mean, we were working together at the time, and we were just catching up on something or whatever on life. And he said, how soon do you think I can be critical of the White House? And I'm like, sitting in the White House. I'm like, is this a serious question? His point, though, which is true, is that in order to have credibility, it's both. You can't be like, if I went out every day and said, Joe Biden is a magical unicorn and everything is fake news out there that's critical of him, that wouldn't be very credible. People who are watching, even those who like him, would think, oh, I don't know, that's not very credible. There are also people who are gratuitously critical when they leave White Houses, and I didn't want to be that as well either.
When I left the White House, I took a job as a contributor on CNN, and I really wrestled. I was like, how am I going to do this? Because I had been sitting in the White House when a lot of our former colleagues would go out who would be 99% positive about Obama. Then they would say one thing that they believed sincerely that we had done wrong, and that thing would lead 12 stories, right? Yeah. And so it's like, I don't want to do that to the person who was sitting in my old job, which at the time was you. And so, but then I got fortunate because on my very first day as a CNN contributor, as I was going to do my first ever appearance on CNN on Jake Tapper's show, Donald Trump announced he was running for president, and so I never had to talk about Barack Obama again. Yes. So it never became a problem. Yes.
I mean, there's so much talk. No. Yes, there's so much talk. There is so much Trump talk right now, which there's a debate about this. And believe me, there are days where I'm like, oh my God, I can't talk anymore about criminal trials for the love of God. But this moment, especially we're in now, this has never happened before. No president has ever been sitting in a courtroom because he is the subject. He's the defendant in a criminal trial. So we do have to talk about it and communicate about it and explain it to the best of our ability. I will tell you, do people in here know who Andrew Weissman is? Of course you do. My point is here, I've gotten to know all of these like amazing lawyers like him. He's a wonderful human being, which will not surprise you at all. I get more DMs about him and whether he's single, all sorts of things. That it's like, this is the time we're living in, everyone. Yeah. Everybody wants more details. He is like helping us understand it. But yeah, we do talk so much about Trump, but I also think that is a big part of the story right now. That is the threat we're facing, is him.
Do you worry, when you think about what's on your show, or just in media broadly, right? There is this balance between identifying and talking about the threat that is Trump. And then there's also, like, Joe Biden has done a bunch of really important things. You worked on a whole bunch of them. And all the polls show that no one, perhaps maybe the people in this room, know what they were, right? And so we deal with this on Pod Save America all the time, which is like, how do you think about that when you put your show together?
Well, we think about it as much as I like him personally, and it's not my responsibility to tell the story of his accomplishments. I do think, and this is hard for any president to hear, he has had more legislative accomplishments than like any president in modern history, right? He's done a lot of things that are hugely impactful. Of course you want to tell that story, and those were hard things to get accomplished. To me, now is not the moment for it. Now is the moment to draw the contrast with Trump. There can be overlap. But how I think about the show is, when are there moments that show something about the political climate and about the contrast and the choice? So we talked about the Wisconsin event that he did a week ago, where he went to Foxconn, where Trump had promised jobs and didn't deliver on the jobs. And I thought that was like a good example of a kind of event that will break through, right? But we think about it in terms of how we can kind of bring to light things that aren't always covered, but not think of it as it's our responsibility to make sure people understand the 8th page of the IRA. Yeah. Because that's not what viewers are necessarily looking for.
Right. Let's take a question from the audience here. Can you talk about your first White House briefing? How did you prepare? And did anything happen that you didn't expect?
Oh my God.
How nervous were you?
Yes. I was really nervous. First of all, because of the insurrection, and it was just a couple of weeks after that, most of Washington was on lockdown. We actually had to meet at the National Zoo to go to the White House that day, which is kind of crazy. We also had double masks on because it was COVID. I had this big binder. I was rolling through the stuff. I tell the story in the book about how the night before, I knew, because I'd sat in so many briefings, I'd had almost every office in the communications and press teams before I was the press secretary, that the first day they were going to ask me what I saw as my role and whether I would ever lie to the press. It's sort of standard fare, even more important when you're thinking about following the Trump administration. And in my conversation with the president during the transition, where I was like, I'm kind of a prepper, this is very obvious at this point in time. Who did I learn that from? This person who works his tail off. Even he pretends now he's like a cool pod bro, but he still works his tail off. But anyway, I was so nervous in that first meeting with him, which is connected to my first briefing, because I was like, he's going to ask me about like the South China Sea and like different counties in the country. I didn't know. But the most important thing to him was that I take the temperature down in the briefing room, was that we take the venom out of the room and make it more of a room for information, not allowing propaganda, but information. And this is important because when I went into the briefing that day, we made a decision to do a briefing on the first day to send a message, which I don't think had been done before, maybe, but not often, because you don't get in the building till noon.
We certainly didn't do it. We took probably a week before we did it for this first briefing in 2009.
Exactly. And so you didn't follow Trump, so there was not the same. But we don't get until noon. But before that briefing, I kept thinking about how the most important thing I could do was the tone, set the tone, and also how I answered that question. So I was very nervous. There's this video footage because Jennifer Palmieri was working at the circus, the show The Circus. And they were there doing backstage stuff. And there's this video footage of Karine and I kind of shimmying before we walk into. It was just like shaking the nerves off. I had like 1 billion cups of coffee. I didn't sleep that first night before my second briefing, so that was not wise. But I really thought about that. Now, the surprising thing, I think it was the first day where I was asked if the president had confidence in the FBI director. And of all of the things, I had not discussed that with him. It's like you'd assume, yes, he does. But you don't know, and you shouldn't speak on for his behalf unless you've talked to him about it, unless you really know. And I kind of left the door open. So that was a little bit of a little headline the first day. So that was a little surprising. Yes.
In the book, one of the things you write a lot about is one of the responsibilities for people who are press secretaries, people you work for a politician or anywhere in your life is you have to be willing to give people bad news.
Yeah.
Right. You write a lot about this. One of the stories you tell is when you had to tell me you were leaving the White House the first time.
I don't know that that's a dramatic bad news story.
It was for me. Jen told me, and I knew from the look on her face, like before the first sentence came out of her mouth, I knew what was happening. I knew which.
I think I say that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, that I could tell. And Jen writes in the book, I was on my way on vacation.
For like the first vacation you'd taken
in 5 years. And
that was very rude of me.
It came at the end of the worst summer at that time of our political lives, because it was the summer that we were stuck in that fight with the Republicans over the debt ceiling. The economy almost crashed. Obama's approval rating went into the toilet as a consequence of that. It almost killed both of us. Like, it was a brutal experience. But internally, externally terrible. But Jen told me, and I took it on board, but it was so like Jen leaving, and you had every right to leave. You had more than earned your right to do it. And I wished you well, because I knew you'd be back, was so traumatic to me that I refused to interview anyone else for the job for like 4 months or even have a conversation with anyone about replacing Jen, that eventually David Plouffe, who was the senior advisor in the White House at the time, sat me down and was like, I don't know what's wrong with you, but you have to solve this problem now. Because no one replaced you. I just had to do all the work. It was so terrible. But talk a little bit about some of the times we've had to give, maybe the story you tell in the book about President Biden, to give bad news.
So I tell, during my first meeting with President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden, I asked her, what can I do to best serve both of you if I'm in this job? And she said, we've gone through a lot in our lives, and I just need you to always tell us the truth. And that stuck with me, because you do get varieties of bad news when you are the president, when you're working in a White House. And that stuck with me and sat with me. The summer working for President Biden, during the withdrawal of Afghanistan, was the worst period of time during my time working for him, for a range of reasons. And certainly the day where we lost men and women who had been serving during the attack on Abbey Gate was the worst day. In the days after that, President Biden, he is, and I've been with him in many of these moments, an empathizer. He's somebody who's been through a lot of trauma and loss in his life. And he often goes to stories of his loss of his son, which happened just a few years ago, the loss of his wife and his daughter, because when he lost them, what helped him was people sharing with him their loss. That doesn't help everybody who's going through loss. Grief is different for everyone. And so he had gone to Dover for the bodies of the men and women who had lost their lives to return home with their families. Afterwards, some of the families, not all, came out and said they didn't appreciate that he had talked about his own story, and that didn't help him. That's their right to feel that way. That's the point. That's part of why I tell the story in the book. But I had to deliver that news to him because the New York Times was writing a story about that. So I had to call him on a Saturday and say, deliver that news, and basically said, the New York Times is writing this story. Here's how we've managed the story. They're writing that some of these families felt offended that you and upset that you had brought up your stories of your own loss. And his response, which is a real credit to him, was the phone kind of went quiet for a while, and I was like, sir, are you still there? Are you still there? And he said, I thought I was helping them. That's what he said. Is there anything else? That's a tough moment, because the story's going to be harsh. It is warranted. It's from people who had just been through the worst experience of their lives. And you're telling someone who'd lost 2 of his children and his first wife that his sharing of grief was not helpful. But it is your responsibility in moments where you're working for somebody and in other aspects of your life too, to be able to deliver tough news. And so that's kind of part of the lesson of that. And certainly that moment has stuck with me.
It's. I was really struck by you telling that story because President, like that, I think it's been a little lost over the last couple of years, but this was a big part, a big discussion in the campaign, and certainly in this convention speech when we talked about Beau, is that empathy and compassion for people going through suffering is what it's sort of his brand. It's what he's known for. Like, when we worked in the White House together, my office was like West Wing, like during White House staff, I don't know if this is still true, but back when we were there pre-COVID, could, after the president had gone back to home, I mean, down the hallway to his house, you could give private tours of the West Wing. And my office was at the very end of the tour because it was next to the Oval Office at the time. And Vice President Biden would have to walk past my office to leave that day. And so I'd say 15 times over the course of the 2 years I sat in that office, I could hear then Vice President Biden consoling someone, like with that person sobbing on his shoulder about something that happened in their lives, a loss of a family member, cancer, all these things. And I would always wonder, like, how did they get to that conversation so quickly? Like they were just in the hallway, but it's just like, that is who he is. So I can only imagine how hard that was to tell him that part of him on the most painful thing in his life that other people were upset by that. Must have been incredibly challenging.
That is part of him. Yeah. And when I went to work for him, first of all, when the Biden team, I didn't work on the campaign, and when they reached out to me about the potential for to be interviewed for the job, at the end of my job interview with him, he was like, "Well, thanks for doing this," and I was like, "Okay, I don't know, thank you." It was, but what stuck with me about him was the realness of him, and this is something people don't always see. But I had kind of tried to say to them, I don't know if you should consider me for this job. He doesn't really know me very well, I mean, could I brief at the podium? I think I could. I did at the State Department, other places, but he doesn't know me very well, and it's so important to capture the voice of someone. And I will say about him, I was a little more comfortable in my own skin than I was early on working for Obama. So I knew that I needed to build that trust with him. But a couple weeks into working for him, I was in the Oval Office and I was giving him an update on reporters and what they were asking about. And he said, "Pull up a chair." I was like, "Okay, pull up a chair in the Oval Office." And I said to him, "I know this isn't something you should say to a president," which, by the way, once that comes out of your mouth, where do we go from here? Right. I think I should continue. But I said, "But I feel like I've known you for a long time." Because he has this level of kind of empathy, but also just kind of down-to-earthness at many moments that is disarming in a different way than Obama. Obama's so normal. They're very, very different. But, and that's the part of him that I think people don't always see.
What was the differences between working for the two men?
Oh my God. Oscar and Felix?
Yeah.
I don't know. Should we call them that? I think the thing of the perception, this goes to kind of our early meetings with him, is the perception of President Obama is often that he is like this massive extrovert, right? Because he's such a brilliant orator. I mean, the speech he gave at the convention is still the best one ever. I challenge anyone to do a better one. And he has this nuanced way of talking about issues that has led me so many times, I'm sure I'm not alone in this room, to be like, ugh, I wish I could call him and ask him about this. Like, I wonder what he thinks about it. But the thing is he is very much, I would say, an introvert. I mean, he gathers his strength and energy from being alone, right? He went to like an island for a month and wrote his book, I mean, he's not, so he has this perception that's the perception of him is so different from how he actually is as kind of a cerebral person. He's extremely efficient in many ways.
So efficient.
And how he does like briefing and prep, and you better go in there with like 4 points because you've got about 4 minutes. And like if he's intrigued by something you're saying, he'll ask a follow-up. And if not, he'll like keep walking with a cup of coffee in his hands, right? So you knew over time there's an efficiency to him. Joe Biden is an extrovert in a way that is like exhausting. I mean, it's tremendous. We actually, when we were going on trips, and trips when you go, I mean, you're on Air Force One, it's very cool, it is amazing. But it can be tiring, especially when you're the president, your team, because you're doing everything else at the same time. Whatever's happening around the world, whatever legislation you're trying to get through. And a couple months in, we were like, he doesn't seem to be kind of enjoying this. You know what we did? We brought a bunch of members of Congress and elected officials on the plane so we could come hang out with them. That would be Obama's like worst nightmare.
That would be punishment. Yes.
It would be like a fireable offense with him. But for Joe Biden, and we realized he had like a bigger pep in his step when he was like talking to people and engaging with people, and that's how he gains energy. And it's such a difference. The other thing is Obama's efficiency. With President Biden, he's like a storyteller. And so you could be in there in the Oval Office. Ben LeBolt, who's our friend who's now the communications director, I told him this before he took the job. I was like, you're going to love him. He's great. I was like, I will just warn you, you may be in the Oval Office for like 5 hours at a time. And when I was the press secretary, I would go in there for a morning prep, if he was doing a press conference or just to get his feedback on something. And usually with Obama, that would be like 15 minutes.
At most,
right?
yeah.
At most. Sometimes 2-3 hours. And I would say, sir, I would like get up to quietly go and be like, where are you going? Be like, I have to do the briefing. That's my job. That's my job here. I've got to go do the press briefing. Because he's like, well, another time in Scranton,
And the thing that, like, I couldn't even, like, I would lose my mind in that situation because you have to leave your cell phone in a cabinet outside the Oval Office. So, like, if you're with the president, nothing horrible has happened because someone will come in and tell you, right? Like, a war is not starting without someone informing you of that. But just like, you could feel your emails just piling up.
Yeah, and then you have to go deal with them when you get back. Yeah. Yes. So that's one of the big differences, I would say.
So earlier this week, President Biden and Donald Trump agreed to a debate 6 weeks from yesterday.
That's not a lot of time to prep.
Not a lot of
debate.
time.
We'll just shorthand that for all of you.
And debate prep is hard, even for the most efficient of presidents.
Because they have to be president.
Yeah, you have to be president at the same time, right? The world does not stop, so you can prepare to answer questions from Jake Tapper, much probably to Jake Tapper's chagrin, but that's how it works. Biden is, like you, a prepper. Like when you say you're in the office for 3 hours sometimes. When I was the White House communications director, I went a couple of times to Joe Biden prep for Sunday shows. And I did all
7 hours long.
Exactly. I did all of Obama's preps for like 6 years. I was always in charge of being the person who, because I was equally impatient, who sort of ran the process. I'd be like, sir, we're here for these things. Boom, boom, boom. You stop talking. You go.
Then I did it. And you had like a note card and you're like, boom, boom, boom. If somebody's still talking and Obama's leaning back and like, like, oh God, Mayday.
Then we're going to wrap this up.
Mayday.
But I went to a Joe Biden prep for like a 7-minute meet the press interview. And I was like 2.5 hours. I was like, I'm never doing that again.
Yes.
Knowing him as you do, and just the stipulation, as you pointed out, you haven't worked there for
2 years.
2 years now. What do you think the prep process is going to be like? How's he going to navigate that process over the next 6 weeks here?
Well, first of all, debate prep involves you actually practicing the debate and someone else playing the person you're.
They build a replica of the stage, match the temperature of what the room is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like that's how specific it is.
Now, Ron Klain, he's amazing.
Ron Klain.
He's amazing. He may seem like a friendly bear. He is, sort of. He's also a tough freaking person. And he is run more debate preps than anyone ever, maybe? I don't know. He's run like every debate prep for years.
He's done, I worked for Ron on the Gore campaign, and I don't think he ran debate prep, but he was intimately involved in that.
Yeah.
He did both of Obama's. He did Hillary's. He did Biden's.
Yeah, okay.
He'll do Biden's again.
So he's a very experienced.
Yes.
He has also known President Biden for decades, and he is a person who can say to him, stop talking, stop questioning this, whatever.
There are 5 people on the planet who can do that, and he's one of them, I would say.
He's one of them. I think the challenge for President Biden is going to be, he's a prepper in the sense that he often thinks that people will judge him for not having every data point on every accomplishment on every issue. I'm like, burn those cards, because he's his best when he is just agile in the moment, engaging in the empathetic way that we've just described. So that's going to be the thing to unravel from, because the other thing you do with debate prep is you prep all the answers to the questions. You have a huge Q&A document. But the debate with Donald Trump is not going to be like, who knows more about how many bridges there are?
If it was, we'd be in great shape.
If we were, we'd be in great shape. It's going to be so much about the physicality of it, I think. and also about a little bit of the needling. I think, we were talking about this backstage. I think they've done a good and interesting job in what they've done on social media, the campaign, and they've been quite aggressive. And he has been in needling Trump a little bit, getting under his skin. They're going to have to figure out the right way to do that during the debate. That's not like viewers aren't like, you know?
Yeah, there's a line there between needling him and seeming like him, right?
Correct.
Which obviously they're much smarter than I am, but they're going to know about that line. But just the goal is not just to make him look bad; it's to make him look bad in contrast and make yourself look bad.
In contrast with you. So that's the challenge. They'll prep one-liners. They'll go back and forth and all of the things. But I think for him, the challenge is going to be letting go of the laundry list of accomplishments, of which he has many, and the data points that prove those accomplishments, because that is not winning any debate.
It's such an interesting dynamic because the incumbent president always loses the first debate. Obama lost.
It was not good.
Kerry lost. Obama's was terrible. Yes. Kerry lost. George W. Bush lost the first one. Bill Clinton didn't really lose the first one, but he did not do great against Bob Dole. And so there's issue. Now, usually that's because the challenger just did 700 primary debates, and the previous president hasn't debated anyone for 4 years. And they've been in a situation where every person stands up when they enter a room, which makes it hard to get back to the world of debating. But Trump hasn't debated in 4 years.
Right.
So that'll be an interesting part of this.
Very much, very much. And like now, are you skeptical it's going to happen?
No, I actually think.
I know I'm not supposed to be asking him. I'm just curious. You all want to know what he thinks.
I mean, you were on Pod Save America with Tommy on Wednesday, and you said you were skeptical, and headlines were written everywhere. Jen Psaki, skeptical debate. I mean, you should. I think as every Formica salesman in the greater tri-state area knows, like no deal's done with Donald Trump till the check clears. But
that's a good line.
But they both seem to believe it is in their strong strategic interest to debate.
What about the details, though, that the Biden team put out wisely? I think
that those are agreed. I think that was in the offer from CNN.
The Formica salesman has questions.
Yes. Well, he has questions about the RFK Jr. part of this. But the no studio audience, and they're still going to have to debate a little bit, I think, on the specifics of the microphone issue. One of the things the Biden people wanted was for the microphone of the person not answering the question to be off.
Yeah.
So you can't interrupt.
I know. That's a good...
applauding for censorship. Great.
Applauding for turning the mic off. That's the only reason I'm a skeptic is because Trump he's a little bit of a wriggler out of...
I mean, theoretically, he could be in prison.
There's that.
Yes. I'm just saying, if Andrew Weissman was here, he might say that timeline is such.
Yes. There's going to be like an edgy... I don't even know the outlet that will do it. Politico Playbook. I know who it is. It'll be like, can there be a debate in prison?
That's right. All right, we have a question from the audience here. Audience member says, I just returned from interning in the White House Office of Digital Strategy.
Amazing.
Hey.
ODS, as they call it.
Go ahead.
Were you the intern? No.
She's just a big ODS fan.
Oh, I love it. Oh, you were the intern.
Yeah.
When Dan and I started in the White House, even though we're young and hip, obviously, we called the office of New Media, right?
Yes.
Right, the New Media team?
Yes.
Just to tell you how old we are.
We were there when it changed, too, Office of Digital Strategy.
We were there when it changed.
Yes.
It's true.
The question is, how can we communicate effectively with more people when so many people have reduced attention spans, the media has changed so much, particularly young voters, I think is the question.
Yeah, this is like the bazillion-dollar question every media organization and outlet in the world is trying to figure out. I'm a believer that you can't take yourself off of, we're working through my own analogy here. You got to still use all the social media platforms, even if there's issues with all of them for different reasons. TikTok, yes. Concerning. China, the whole thing is concerning. Facebook, the spread of disinformation, all these things are concerning. But you have to still use them to communicate. Facebook actually is not how you communicate with young people, obviously, but I'm just using it as an example. That I think is one thing that sometimes people are still debating. Like, should we all just not use these platforms to just send a sign or send a message that they're all bad? No, we need to use them to communicate with people. The thing that the campaign is doing that I think is interesting and you don't always see every day is using the digital social media platforms as like a form of organizing, right? So it's not just like speaking at people, but using them as a way to engage with people, which is quite effective. And we know from even our olden times that like neighbor to neighbor engagement or trusted sources are often people you know or friends or things like that. So I still think it can be used as an organizational tool in that way. In terms of reaching young people, I mean, I think some of it is a lot of the biggest platforms that have an opportunity, Pod Save America aside, to engage with young people and have younger audiences have not quite figured out how to use platforms beyond like linear television quite yet, right? Or print newspapers. That is a delivery mechanism issue. It's not the only issue, but I think there's like an outdatedness of how most legacy media organizations are using social media platforms. I don't think that solves it entirely, but I think that is a place where there's opportunity and would help provide like a greater stream of accurate information to people. But Dan believes there should be more progressive media and more, yes, we know this. This is true also. That is also true.
Yes, but what you say is I could not agree more. Looking at the upcoming election, what is the biggest challenge facing Democrats and Republicans? There was a semicolon in there. Just
Okay. I think for Democrats, it's the risk of people staying home for a range of reasons. Because they're upset with the president about any range of issues, because they feel disillusioned. I will go two things that I think are a challenge. Communicating about the economy is very difficult. I've done it over the course of time. It's also even more difficult when you are the person sitting in the White House and in the Oval Office because you are blamed for things that people feel frustrated about in their everyday life. You may be responsible for that, but you may not be able to control some of it either. And when people are frustrated with the systems and failure to deliver on them, they want change. And change is not the person sitting in the White House, ever. So that I think is a challenge. For the Republicans, I mean, Trump is like a benefit and a challenge at the same time, right? Because he is obviously has a hold on the base of people, but you know, we always say, like, people say, nothing he says ever matters and it's all baked in. It's like, I don't know. I don't know that we know everything's baked in. Like, so he's just the person who feels more at risk of saying something so crazy, so offensive, doing something that it turns people off, and they have no control over that. As much as he is also energizing and engaging his base because he is, you know, campaigning as the aggrieved and taps into the aggrieved. So I don't know. I would think, what do you think?
I think the biggest challenge for Democrats is the economy.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, in that New York Times Siena poll, 3/4 of the country thinks the economy is fair or poor.
Yeah.
Those numbers are worse among young voters, Hispanic voters, and black voters, the three groups that those polls at least suggest we are having some struggles with. And in that poll, 30% of voters say that the economy and/or inflation is the single issue that will affect their choice most. That is twice as big almost 3 times as big as any other issue in the poll. Abortion and immigration are the two others that reach double digits. The rest are in single digits. And it's like kind of that simple, is that people have to feel either better about the economy or worse about what Donald Trump would do to the economy. And I think the latter is probably easier than the former to communicate at this point, because we're less than 6 months out. I know as alarming as that is. And even as things get better, it's just people's, like the economy gets better, and then people feeling better about the economy is like a lagging indicator.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of reaching the point where even some, you know, significant, even like a historically significant change in inflation over the next 5 months won't necessarily, it could, hopefully, but may not manifest itself politically by the time people start voting in October, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of
you
the
can't
change.
Also tell people how they feel about the economy.
Yeah.
They don't want to be told how they feel.
One of the things you talk about a lot in the book is sort of your interactions with reporters, right?
Yeah.
It's been a huge part of it. You are very gracious to reporters in your dealings with them, and you talk about and you talk in the book a lot about trying to be as understanding as possible of sort of like how hard their jobs are and how their lives are, and that and you bring to it, I think, in a way which I was personally incapable of. Like a real view that everyone's operating as much as possible in good faith. Maybe a couple
I
exceptions.
mean, everyone is not, but the majority.
Majority of like real traditional reporters who
Yeah.
come cover the White House are trying to do the best they can to do the best job they can.
Yeah.
Are really hard, often sometimes poorly paid situations. When you look at how, I'm just curious from that perspective, right, and how you've dealt with reporters, what your take is on the feud between the New York Times and the White House right now.
Oof. I think that
And it could be this feud is mostly one way, right, from the Times, right.
Right. It seems a little two-way, I think. It kind of originated.
I was giving you an out there, but
No, I mean, it kind of originated, which is in some of the reporting, I think, but I think it originated with when they asked President Biden to send a picture of him, like signed, and he sent a picture of him and one of the people who worked in the elevator signed instead, which I don't know, upset them to some extent.
the guy from the documentary.
The guy from the documentary. I think that I would not have been an advocate for like publicly fighting the Times. That's just not my style. It doesn't mean it's the wrong thing. Because I just don't think that that is a winning public argument. It looks, I kind of still understand why they did it, because there's a huge frustration of the type of reporting, what they see as biased reporting, leaning friendlier to Trump, not friendly, but friendlier to Trump than is warranted, and not as friendly to Joe Biden. What I think is interesting about this whole thing is that what it exposes is this challenge in media right now, which I don't live as a challenge. You don't live as a challenge, right? Which is this notion that you can't speak to, if you speak to kind of the threat that Trump poses, you're taking a side, right? And to me, the threat that he poses to democracy and to our country should be universally viewed, right? That is not about like the New York, any straight down the middle journalist saying like, this plan is better than that plan, or this is a friendlier candidate than that friendlier candidate. It's like an existential thing. So in some of their answers, and I think Jonathan Karl wrote a book, to his credit, where he basically calls out this threat.
Yeah.
He is like a reporter that you wouldn't want questioning you in a briefing room because he's super tough, but he called it out. And I think this is like a moment where a lot of these media organizations and reporters are it's like, where are you standing in history in this moment is the question to me.
What do you miss most about, this is an audience question, what do you miss most about working in the White House?
Gosh, it's funny to say this out loud, but I worked in the White House more than any other job I've ever had in my adult life.
3 different times for 2 different presidents?
3 different times for 2 different presidents. And so there's a familiarity and a comfort and an understanding of the operations of it and the flow of it and the people. And I love the people. I mean, down to like the people who work in the Situation Room or the people who are at the front desk or all these sorts of things, the ROTUS, the receptionist of the United States is what they're called, the ROTUS. I know. So I miss that because it's like what I knew, and I knew that the people working in government, and I mean, I worked in the State Department for a couple of years too. It's not where there's civil servants and foreign service officers who are not partisan at all, but these are like people who are trying to do good on an everyday basis, and what motivates them. And so I miss that. And so transitioning, I love my job now, but it's a transition. Early on, the first night I did election night in 2022, I was like, I brought all these snacks because I was like, I don't know, like anybody like hang out with me? I have no idea. I don't have any friends yet. So I miss that familiarity and I miss the people.
Follow-up question from the audience. What do you miss the least?
Oh my God. What I miss the least is being kind of on call at every single moment of the day. And you couldn't walk away. And this is still like a fear. I mean, you tell me I'm 2 years out, like at some point you'll get over it. It's like, obviously I didn't bring my phone out here. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not going to bring it when I'm signing books, but you still are so trained. Like, what if I get and I'm like, nobody's text. It's like, it's fine. I can get back to them. And there's like I would wake up in like a cold sweat and like look at my phone, BlackBerry, iPhone, whatever. We did both. to see what was on there. And you can never really ever be off. And I think that's a challenge. Dana Perino, of all people, said to me that the thing about being on television is you work really hard in the moment. You have to like know all the things. You're under pressure. But if you're off, like you're with your family, you're actually off. Because like, what are you going to, like, if you're like in a cabin in Vermont, you're not like anchoring a show. So that has been kind of a nice thing to be able to be present in a different way.
There's this famous story about Dan Bartlett, who was Bush's communications director and then Bush's senior advisor, and he eventually left the White House. And he went, like a week or so after he left, he went golfing, and he brought his personal BlackBerry with him. And like through 9 holes, he didn't get an email. And he called his wife and asked his wife to send him an email as a test because he assumed his BlackBerry wasn't working,
It's so
and
true.
it's like went right through. It's like.
It is, right. You're kind of not in the know of all the things. I mean, that's what I miss too. And there have been moments, especially moments of big crisis in the last 2 years, where I want to walk into Jake Sullivan's office or Jeff Zients' office and be like, what's going on here? Because when you're the press secretary, the communications director, you need to do that to understand. And it's, as much as you're knowledgeable about how things work or kind of the players involved, you don't know the same level of detail of why a decision was made always.
The night I really decided that I had to leave the White House was I had gone to the movies with my now wife, and we went to dinner first, and she had to do an emergency conference call. She worked in the White House as well. An emergency conference call at dinner because we had decided to add, she planned events for the White House, like her press events. We decided there was an insane decision to potentially add an event in 24 hours, which you actually cannot, it's logistically impossible, but she had to do the call at 7:30 on Friday night while we were at dinner before the movie. Then we went in the movies, and I had to leave the movie. Then something happened and there was no reception in the movie theater, so I had to keep leaving every 15 minutes to walk into the lobby to let my emails pile into my BlackBerry, respond to them, and then go back in. And then when I went out, I realized that the conference call had started, like a random emergency conference call. I had to do that from the lobby, and I was like, no more. Cannot do this anymore.
It's not. Yes, that is what it is like. Yeah, that is what it's like.
So it is good not to live like that.
Yeah, that's true.
But it, like, you met, like, best professional experience of our lives, no question.
A huge gift.
We're down to our last question here.
Okay.
What every political communication staffer believes their life goal is to be the White House press secretary. Whether you are you're a deputy press secretary for a House member, you write speeches for a city council member, like you look at that, they call it the podium. You want to get to the podium. Mm-hmm. I thought that's what I wanted for myself. Mm-hmm. And then I watched Robert Gibbs, Obama's first press secretary, give 2 briefings. And I said to myself, I cannot do this. I'm late in life with 2 children, I'm a much more calm person, but I would have murdered someone. Like can you imagine me being yelled at by Ed Henry? Yeah.
I would like get him Starburst or High Chews. Yes. You know what High Chews are? Those candy. We would just like throw him into his office.
Yeah, it was not good. But how did you keep your calm up there with a bunch of people, Peter Doocy included, trying to get you upset on a nightly basis, or a daily basis, excuse me?
Yeah, well, I mean, on a serious note, I remembered what the president had asked me to do. Of course, you want to answer questions accurately, and I'll always have all the information. That's the goal. But the other part of it was taking the temperature down and not making it an environment that was venomous. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have discussions and debates and arguments, and that's part of democracy, and you have them in there. So that was always sitting on my shoulder. I also had this tactic that I used before I was the press secretary with reporters, where when they started getting escalatory or yelling and screaming, I just would pretend I was an orderly in an insane asylum and like talk more calmly and slowly. So that was like this tactic that I developed over time, and I just used in the briefing room as well. And the last thing, which I never did in the briefing room, and I mentioned this in my book, Dana Perino writes in her book about how in the podium, there was like a little space for a cup for water. I never used it. I don't know. I think I thought I was going to spill it on
I would
myself.
never have brought water in there for all the money in the world.
It would have been a disaster.
Yes.
Like I literally...
I would rather lose my voice than worry about spilling water on camera.
I was like, I can't. It's too much. I never put water in there. She used to, when the reporters were getting particularly uppity in the briefing room, she would just put her hand in there and flip him the bird. They didn't even know. So sometimes you have to do that too. I never did that, but I would recommend that to the aspiring future press secretaries out there.
I would say that reading your book and really taking a lot of lessons from you about how you very calmly dealt with reporters was a real reminder of how I really aspire to deal with my small children. Which is the more they escalate, the calmer you have to be.
Yes, it's so true.
Well, Jen, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank all of you too for being here.
Thanks to Jen Psaki, author of Say More, Lessons from Work, the White House, and the Role, for joining us today. We encourage you to pick up a copy of Jen's new book here or at your local bookstore, but especially here. And if you would like to support the club's effort in making virtual and in-person programming possible, please visit their website at www.commonwealthclub.org. I'm Dan Pfeiffer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.